Welcome to Ruby Thursday. I'm Melissa Wanish. This Ruby Roundtable was recorded on October 14th, 2015 at Alpha Sites. Thanks again to Alpha Sites for being such a great host. In this meetup, Matt Jording led a discussion about composing Eloquent JavaScript in Rails. We talked a lot about different tools that can help you clean up your JavaScript and use it correctly. This will be a part of a series of discussions that Matt will lead in the upcoming months. Enjoy this recording of the Ruby Roundtable.
Okay, guys. So today we're going to be talking about JavaScript in Rails, or on Rails. Who here develops for Rails? Who here believes they are coding JavaScript as well? We probably aren't. Because the vast majority of Rails sites have incorrect and poorly engineered JavaScript. And I'm as guilty as anyone else in the past who's done this. Who here who believes they're coding JavaScript with their Rails application is testing their JavaScript outside of feature tests? 1, 2. Okay, a couple, right? Is anyone testing their JavaScript in their feature tests? Okay. Are you testing your Ruby? Yeah? Okay. A smattering. So the question is, do you have confidence that your code and features work? It's like there's a good amount of JavaScript that you have in your application right now, right? That's doing a lot. And it's compounded by Jquery plugins. It's compounded by every other user experience feature that gets introduced that you just include as a library on your site, but don't actually look at the GitHub endpoint for it, see if it's tested, run the tests on that library itself, see if that code works for your particular use cases, right? There's that. Also, JavaScript has gone through a tremendous transition over the past, I'd say, 8 years in the community, as well as how it's being applied to applications. And I'd say that Rails and Rails engineers have generally been kind of late to the game. I believe Rails adopted Jquery well after Jquery was kind of the gold standard for DOM manipulative libraries. Do you agree? Yeah. And now it's still being used primarily as a Vue edition, right? Which it is not. And it should be treated like code, which it is. Okay, so we're doing it wrong. Is the synopsis there? So the question that we're going to ask tonight, and we're going to try to answer, is how do we go from doing it wrong in our current applications to doing it right, having a good understanding of the code we write in JavaScript on Rails, and then taking it that much further to adopt modern frameworks like React, like Angular, like Ember, or whatever your JavaScript framework du jour is. Who here is using a JavaScript framework outside of Jquery? A lot. Right on. What is it? What's the makeup here? We have React. Cool. The new hip cool kid in town. Angular. Cool. The last kid to be cool. Ember? Okay. Other? Backbone. Okay, sure. Sorry. I mean, not because you're using Backbone, but sorry because I forgot Backbone. Cool. All right. So, yeah. JavaScript written for most Rails applications is still considered part of the view and not developed with the rigorous standards that we apply to code in our regular apps, right? So how bad is it? What can we say about the bad code we write? Douglas Crawford wrote a book a few years back called JavaScript: The Good Parts, and that implies one thing in the title, and that's that there are bad parts. What can we say about let's have a confessional of bad code we've written. Who here has tried to develop object-oriented JavaScript with classical inheritance? It was a long time. I'm old. I'm really old. So that's my excuse. And that was a long time ago. JavaScript is a prototypical language and it's still being treated, and it's going to get worse as we approach ES6, right? And we have first priority definitions of class and things of that nature, right? People are moving from other languages. They're not going to understand prototypical composition. They're going to come to this language. They're going to see class, and they're going to start doing classical inheritance and all sorts of other bad composition structures. That's bad. Who here still writes inline JavaScript at all? Come on. Yeah. Yeah. I still have to touch inline JavaScript here and there. Every time I touch it now, I think I extract it. But I have actually altered and made commits against inline JavaScript in the past year. Right? So that's not starting it, but that's not actually refactoring it to something good. Who here is testing the JavaScript functionality? Not just the walkthrough of the user interaction, but whether, say, like, I don't know, when I click this button, then this class changes, or I no longer, this component is hidden, or something like that in a feature test. Right. Yeah. A lot of people are doing that. And who here is using a third-party JavaScript library that they haven't read or run tests on? Exactly. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing, right? And we can say to ourselves, well, it's really popular, so it's got to be rigorously tested and well-documented. And 9 times out of 10, it's not. What's worse is that it's not rigorously tested for your use case, right? You're going to be putting, say, a carousel on a DOM element that library has never actually had put on that DOM element, right? Or you're going to basically compose a structure around in that page of CSS and JavaScript that particular component has never been exposed to, and so you're going to be testing new interactions and basically exposing new bugs that code has, and you're not testing it, and that's bad. These are some of the things that we can go ahead and take a look at our applications and see what problems we have before we even get started, right? Because we're going to inherit a ton of applications that'll have just a pile of JavaScript, hopefully not in line, but a pile someplace. And we're going to have to think to ourselves, okay, well, I've got a bunch of Jquery here, and I really, really like React because that's the new kid in town, and I'd really like him to come over to my house and play with my toys. But now I have to deal with all this Jquery, and what do? Well, the first thing is to understand what you're doing with it. And that means you have to have some semblance of the code quality and how to test it and move off of it, right? If we were to inherit a big project, and we can do a lot of things today. It's an open forum, so interrupt me whenever, all right? Otherwise, I'm just going to talk through this. And that's not great, you know? So when we take an application and we have potentially a mess, at least something we don't understand, right, that supposedly works from a customer perspective, right, Hopefully they're doing a decent job of checking everything on every browser, et cetera, but probably not. What do we do to actually prepare it and make it work and give it the type of rigor we need to treat it like code? First off, scan through all of your views and look for what? Inline JavaScript. Yeah, inline JavaScript. Why is inline JavaScript bad? I mean, it's essential. JavaScript just goes on the page anyway, right? And in fact, React components, what's that?
It's very hard to maintain.
Yep, it's hard to maintain. Also, it could be all over the place, yep. Also, it's not modular, and everything that you're going to be moving to is.
What's worse is it could be a situation where you're not applying, do not repeat yourself because you're like shit all over the place.
Yeah, it's a mess. So spotting all your inline JavaScript and at the very least wrapping it and putting it into your assets folder or whatever and confining it to an area that you can manage it. It's great. Check for your feature tests for where they're actually doing testing of a JavaScript component or function, right? That doesn't mean necessarily if I'm testing something that has like a modal view on it or something like that and has a JavaScript, I shouldn't be basically testing that the modal trigger or whatever is actually calling the library that I've implemented. Keep and checking the classes and whatnot. You should be checking for the user behavior only, right? When I click this, then I should see exactly what the user needs to see at that moment, right? Not that this no longer is hidden, right? Or that this triggers this event, right? Those are all poorly implemented behaviors, and they'll make your test suite slow. And they don't do a good job of maintaining themselves and they'll become brittle very quickly. Take a look at your untested third-party libraries, right? Likely, you have a ton of them in there for no reason, right? Who here has used or is using Jquery UI? Right. There's a whole kitchen sink full of things that that probably could be done through like underscore at this point. Right, underscore and a little bit of DOM manipulation on a simple library that you could come up with. Plus, you've probably, if you're still using jQuery UI, you've probably hacked on one of those components pretty bad and tried to make it your own, which means that you should have written your own. Because then you would know exactly what code's in there, and you would have tests around it, and it would be solid, well-maintained code. Okay? What other horror stories do we have?
Question about the thing you just said. You said essentially that to not use something like untested library, but just implement it yourself?
Likely, yeah. That's probably what you want. So when I say untested library, I mean that your library that you're installing does it have tests? Can you run them? Okay? If you can, that's better. But again, those tests don't necessarily test the interaction that you're putting on it, right? You can test your third-party library from an interface perspective, right? You can mock out something and actually see that it does what it's supposed to do in like Jasmine, right? On a simple unit test, right? To make sure that for the page that you're using it for, the use case you have, that it's going to work for your use case. And that's just, testing from the interface is the least you can do. Making sure that they actually have a well-tested, well-documented library that you have confidence is being kept up to date is the other thing, right? Also, again, your JavaScript libraries are going to change over time. Right? You're going to want to move to React. Will this library work with React? Will you be able to use that third-party library for your new set of views in JSX? Maybe. There's only one way to tell. And that's not deploying it. So with some idea of where the problems are, we can actually start to inventory our JavaScript features. So we didn't see a lot of hands for testing JavaScript. Why don't we test JavaScript? That's not test. You do find out, yes. Having your users find a bug, which I don't like the term bug because what a bug is not software bugs. That implies the responsibility is put on someone else. It is a mistake. It's your mistake, right? When a user finds a bug, they have found your mistake. Sure.
So the history behind it is such that I'll just throw this in line, and that's been the convention.
Yep.
But now we have code structures, Jasmine, et cetera. There's no excuse.
Well, there's no excuse unless you're a Rails developer and every article you ever see on testing never mentions JavaScript except for in the context of I need a JavaScript driver. Right? That's primarily what you see. Which is really unfortunate. Where you see JavaScript testing is on Node apps, okay? And Rails is a much more mature back end, and we should be able to test the JavaScript that is the client for our Rails app, right? So we build APIs as well as front ends, as well as back ends in Rails. Let's actually test the code that is probably, I'd say, 50% of the code that you're going to work with on any project, and that's JavaScript as well. Right? It's great to do unit tests in models, controllers, integration tests. But yeah, we're going to need to actually have some degree of confidence in our JavaScript code. Otherwise, the feature that is most seen by our users is going to have a bug filed against it. And that may be because you didn't actually know that they were going to use a particular browser or whatever. But more so, when someone files a bug that's in any of your code and you have no unit tests around it, you're not going to be able to identify, reproduce, or be able to correct that problem easily. Because what you're doing is you're having user experience tests, right? You're running all of your app, right? And seeing if you can reproduce the bug. And that includes feature tests. That's the same thing. Running all of your JavaScript to identify one JavaScript problem is really a complex task. Because then that exercises all of the code that could go wrong. And it's not necessarily going to guarantee you have confidence that this function always works, which is what you want in a unit test. Okay?
Do you have any advice on how to avoid that kind of situation? Who doesn't have to deal with it?
Avoid?
Because I want to not get myself into that situation.
So there's, as you say, there's some very good tools now for JavaScript testing. And you should be able to wield them in some sense. And the easiest way, have you guys have you been exposed to refactoring or redesigning an application that needs help and has no tests? Has anyone done that? Yeah. What do you do?
Honestly, the first thing is you have to create a mental model of what the test would have been.
Right.
And then you have to refactor and then write your own tests. It's not fun.
Right. It's not a lot of fun. But what you gain from testing is one of the many things you gain from testing is a document of the features that your usership wants or needs, right? So then you have like a list of things that should be working. And that if you don't have tests, all you have is a complex history of interactions between developers, users, maybe a Basecamp archive, a bunch of, if you're very lucky, maybe a tracker archive or something that kind of documents some things and some interactions in between, but nothing really in code that points to this feature that the users want, or we want to deliver the feature, has been implemented by this code, right? And we know why it might be breaking, so at least we can start building some tests around that. So, you basically have to go back and rediscover what the features are that you were going for. You have to rediscover that this carousel should, also respond to the JKL or whatever old school video game navigation keyboard shortcuts rather than just the arrows, right? Which may have been a feature. I believe I actually implemented that which is insane, but it was requested. So, but that's you have to discover that, and that's why you have those bindings. And that was an actual feature that was so when users start to use that and it breaks, it's a bug, right? It's really a mistake, and it's and because you don't have confidence and unit tests around it, then it's a problem. So, Jasmine and Protractor. You use Protractor? How do you like it?
I'm honestly just getting started with this, but it's great. End-to-end tests are really easy. Cross-browser tests are really easy with it. Nice.
And that's because you have an Angular app, right? I have used Protractor, but I've also tested Angular with Jasmine. Jasmine is probably it's the baseline for a lot of application testing. A lot of frameworks are built off of it. I think it's kind of it's analogous to RSpec, right? So if you've played with RSpec or Minitest or anything like that, the syntax is very similar, and it's fairly easy to get up and running on it. So I generally start with Jasmine, and even if you're using React, you're using Jest or something, which is what Facebook recommends for testing, and they do recommend that you test all your code. They built Jest off of Jasmine as well. So, from that perspective, it's not hard to get up and running. Now, what do? You consolidate all of your code to your, at the very least, assets area in JavaScript, in a JavaScript folder, build actual files that represent actual components that you have functions for, and it can be jQuery, right? And then you build tests around that. The tests are fairly easy. I can show you some tests that are, and then we can take a look at other tools that work in conjunction with test suites, right, to make that a little easier. So here's a very simple set of tests. Not sure if everyone can see that. Right, so this is in jQuery, Jasmine, right? So you have, that's just the, let's see. So that's the asset, and let me grab the test for it. So in my spec, JavaScripts, and then, right, I describe this form function, and I create a fixture, which is very, very simple. The fixture, all it does is, right, so instead of loading your entire page, your entire DOM, right? this is just a very simple form tag with some include bits. And this is the description of it, in which we load it. And then we do something where we're spying on an object and binding some events to it. Everybody know what spying is? Cool. Mock objects, if I were to say to that, do you know what mock objects are? Cool. I don't like the term mock objects because it seems like they're silly things that need to be ignored.
I think what's stubs?
Stubs is all right. I like...
But it's the same idea.
Yeah. So you have a test, right? And you have a stand-in, a test double, right? Like a stunt double for the actual class that you're working with, right? So this is just an implementation test where it adds classes to the form. This is not the best set of tests, but we are testing on it. When the selected value does this, updates this type to null. So I'm expecting something to have been called, right? So since I'm mocking this, when I call this, it should call, or this, when I handle this, I expect my update vendor type to have been called, all right? And it should have been called with null. This is very simple, and it's not hard to do, right? This is not great in some sense. It's still dealing with legacy code, is what it is. It's still dealing with a bunch of JavaScript, a bunch of Jquery that's been sitting around and growing dust, and before we actually move to something else, we need to actually document it and test it and make sure it works. And then we can move off of it. All right? So describe blocks, spy on your objects, especially third-party things. Say you have Backbone, right? You're going to have a big app module, right? And a bunch of things in it, right? And you're going to need to, and you're probably reaching through and touching all that code here and there. All right, so when you test one component or one view, when you're testing the view or testing the controller or whatever you're, or testing the actual models in there, you don't want to also be testing the controller, right? You want to make certain that that is being calling the right method with the right params, etc. Let me find a few things about Jasmine. Jasmine is pretty easy to work with and has really good documentation. It's almost entirely built to be like our spec, so it should be familiar to anyone, right? So you describe something, it contains a spec with an expectation, right? So expect true to be true, right? You have a simple expectation that gets called for every function you're testing, one expectation, or two. But clear, it does this, and you have some clear definition. It's not testing a bunch of things in one it declaration. And you have nice convenience like to be truthy. Everybody knows that JavaScript has some truthy interestingness, right? Why do we do triple equity symbols? What's that? Yeah. Yep. So I'm sure you've all seen the wonderful talk with the Batman thread and all of that. Why is your JavaScript? Who was that again? Do you remember? What's that? Yeah, Watt. The fantastic video on that. JavaScript has some interesting behavior. Gary Bernhardt does a great talk. I'm sure you guys have all seen it. in which he lightning talk basically shows all of the interesting things that can happen in your JavaScript. JavaScript's interesting. You have interesting bits where when I call, is it 2.2 plus, is it 0.1? Yeah, 0.2 plus 0.1, right? That's fine. Right, that makes sense, though. How about, why is that a problem? JavaScript's interesting. You need to test it. So having decent unit tests increases your confidence in what you're working with. So, great. You've built some... go ahead. What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just JavaScript that works with that form. And that's, again, we saw a bunch of JavaScript working with a form. And that component was called some admin form or some nonsense.
My question is that, the form itself is just an object, right? It's not really an object. It represents a statement in the application.
Sure, but you're going to, so that's just a, in your app, right? App object, your window. So we've attached, in that case, a form object that does all of the things for that form, like, I don't know, say you have the ability to, here's a common use case. I have a form that has a has many for that object, right? And we'll say has many appointments, right? And we want the user to be able to add many times and dates, right, before they actually submit the entire project or something. That's a very common use case, right? So I'm going to add 3 times and dates that work for me around a general project so that I can submit it. And this, in the model world, in our Ruby world, we have an object called project and then has many appointments. We want to be able to create a single endpoint that the user can go ahead and create that project. Yeah, I do this every time. Absolutely. Is that all right? Okay. Create the project and create all of their scheduled dates and then submit them, right, without having to go through another refresh, right, or another screen or a page load. This is a very common type of scenario. Something that's easily solved with more mature frameworks, but we have Jquery. So we've gone ahead and created something that just duplicates the DOM, iterating on the actual iteration of the form for the nested attributes, right? That you'll see that in many of the code bases that you inherit. So where you test that, right? You have to test that with Jasmine and see that every time that you do hit that add button, that it actually iterates the proper DOM level, and when you remove, it still keeps a decent count, say, right? And you can do that with a very minimal DOM. You don't have to include all of your JavaScript when you test it. And that's useful. So, is that?
Yeah. Also, like another thing that is, the form in your application can behave differently than the one that is using on the user.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear.
I'm saying that the form that you create your own, as a developer, I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah.
I am lazy, but I'm getting form to work, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to catch all the edge case if you have the form in your application. So
Sure. You don't need to catch all the edge cases. Your users will do that for you. Right? I mean, like, that's why you test on units and not feature tests, because you can test everything that functions without testing all of the edge cases. You're just dealing with a very minimal DOM. You're dealing with a simple function that's supposed to return or do one thing. You had one job, right? So you make sure that your JavaScript is doing its one job, and that's it. And then you have confidence in that one component. And then you can at least know that, okay, we found our usership found something when interacting with this page in this form. All right, we know that we're testing this one thing that this is supposed to do. Is something else happening when I see in the console? Is it calling that line? Are we missing a edge case on that one thing? Or is it something that we're not testing? Or is it something outside of our run? And that at least allows you to narrow down what's wrong and see that, okay, well, this is not our particular component on the page. It's the fact that we're shoving a Google Analytics iframe or some nonsense into the page at the wrong place, right? That at least allows you to narrow things down and know what the problem is, because you have unit tests around the code that you're delivering. So, for the love of God, at some point you have to see this. It's one of the best things ever. He just walks around JavaScript and shows all of its weirdness. All right. Any other questions? So when you're testing, what do you test?
Well, honestly, I inherited a lot of tests.
Sure. Oh, great. Sort of.
We do end-to-end tests. We also have unit tests.
Yep.
It's pretty good coverage.
What's your ratio?
Coverage ratio?
What is how much do you have in feature tests, and how much do you have in unit tests?
I don't know that off the top of my head. It's a good question.
It is a good question. Yeah.
Now I'm going to find that out.
It's a question I ask on every application, because more often than not, you move from, when you're working with applications, you instantly start to switch from the test pyramid, right, which is the smallest amount is supposed to be feature tests, because that's brittle, expensive code, right? You're doing a lot of actual interaction with the browser. It takes a long time. It's a pain. So you're supposed to do a little tiny amount of that, right, just to make sure that everything's going swimmingly on happy path. And then you test your collaboration level, right, which is a little bit more than the feature test. And then the entire bottom foundation is supposed to be unit tests. Okay? What you have is you start moving from that to from this or this, right, to this, which is, I believe we put a cloud up there and we call it the ice cream, right? Which means we have very little unit testing and lots of manual testing through UI. Some people put a little eye in the top of the pyramid, so over here, so that you know that that's users looking at, or QA departments or something looking at the test, and then the rest is acceptance testing, which is your collaboration testing, and then your unit tests. What happens here is you test entirely the entire app and every bit of code in it, every single walkthrough. So this becomes less valuable. And the thing about unit tests when you work with them is you start to expose design flaws, right? Like when I'm setting up a unit test, I start to see, oh, wow, I have to spy on or mock or stub 20 objects. That's probably a poor design. this function that I'm working with needs 20 objects or 5 objects or whatever to actually work, that's probably bad because it should be small code and it should do a single responsibility. Do you guys know solid principles? Right? Some of you do, some of you don't. Listen, there's no. You should look it up because as you're teaching yourself good coding practices, solid principles are definitely important. There's a little bit. I'd say it's still applicable for most things in JavaScript. I'd say design patterns also. The design patterns from the Gang of Four also talked about good software practices and even went into things like how classical inheritance is probably a bad idea and we should be doing composition over classical inheritance, things like that. So those are, So that's effectively my first tenet is that you should be testing all your code. You should know all of your code. And if you're using a third-party library, it should be tested. And if it's small, if it's doing something simple, you should be writing it. Right? If you're doing a tool, if you're importing a tooltip library, ask yourself why. Right? Ask yourself how much code is in there in order for that tooltip library to accommodate itself to every application ever. And how much code you would need to make one for your application. Right? It's probably a drastic difference. Right? You want to reduce the amount of code that you put in your application. Delight in deleting code. Because the less code you have, the less you need to maintain, the less you need to actually work through. All right, so that's Jasmine and testing. Now, anybody use Jasmine at all? Sweet. Do you guys run Teaspoon? Cool. Do you use Teaspoon? Sure. Sure. So Teaspoon is great because it's a test runner for JavaScript with Rails in mind. Okay? And it works with, I believe it works with a few different platforms, not just Jasmine. Right? It does have a WebDriver in it.
Jasmine, Mocha, and Qt.
Okay, so yeah. Yep. So it supports 3 big unit testing frameworks for JavaScript. Unfortunately, no protractor. Sorry about that. But the beauty of it is that you can just run rake teaspoon and pass a suite to it, and it will run it just like your other JavaScript or your other RSpec tests. Okay, you can run it in the browser, or you can run it on the command line with rake tasks. It tells you what's failing and what's running, and you can go ahead and have that run with your standard rake task. So in every Rails application, there's a default rake task. And what default rake task does is run tests. There's a reason for that. It assumes that if you're not calling out something, you should be running tests. So you can hook this in to run before your other tests. I tend to think that that's generally a good idea because the JavaScript tests can be very, very quick and will fail fast. As opposed to, say, feature tests, which can be long and complex. So I like to get it over with right away. In any case, I use this on most applications that we use just say like Jquery and Jasmine on. There is a gem you can just install, Teaspoon Jasmine. Okay? Very, very simple. And what that does is it allows you to, in your specs folder, have a JavaScript folder and write your specs in there and run them, which is great. Makes it super, super easy, at least to wrap your head around and have everything work. So this is just a simple, apparently changing the world function that is tested, which again does the dumbest test ever. But it does make sure that Jquery is defined for whatever reason. And then you can also do things like mark tests as pending and deferring execution, which is great. They have their own fixture tests, so you can fixture load. It's basically built on top of Jasmine in the same way. Any questions on that? Cool. Teaspoon's a great way to get things going. Cool. So next I want to talk, unless we have more to talk about on this, talk about moving to modern modular frameworks. We're not all using Jquery. We're using other things. Sometimes we're using Jquery inside of other things, which sometimes can be super weird. Regardless, we have to manage our dependencies for most of our JavaScript now. How do we do that? How do we manage dependencies? So in Ruby, we have a bunch of things that manage dependencies. What do you do? Okay, great. I was looking for even lower level than that. Yes, which is given to us where? Or actually, NPM, right? Or Node implementations, right? Have a dependency management tools built in. And Node does JavaScript great and has a lot of tools built around it. And does everybody here develop on Macs, PCs, or Unix machines? OS X? Cool. PCs? Cool. Linux? Excellent. Cool. So with both Brew, which I'm sure all of the OS X people are used to, and with whatever flavor of Linux you are using, has a package manager like apt-get, or I don't know. Does anybody use Fedora anymore? Portage, sure. Yeah. There's that. So with all of those things, you can install a few different management utilities. Does everybody here use RBENV or RVM? Okay. Because we want to manage the Ruby version we're working with. We don't want to just settle with what OS X and Apple have given us. The same thing is true with Node. And there is something called NVM. You can brew install NVM, and then you can install either Node.js version X or even IO.js. Does everybody know what IO.js is? And why there was a rift, and if that rift will ever come back to merge?
Well, I think they already announced that they already merged.
They've announced it. They haven't merged. Right? They did merge? Okay. All right. Well, then never mind. Although there's probably some libraries out there still using a dependency of one or the other, right? With NVM, you can do things like NVM install a particular Node version, or IO.js, which is effectively a fork of Node. Let's see. Pretty sure. It's a huge screen behind me. Node version manager. Cool. Right? Very simple to set up. You can do brew, or you can just curl it. Right? And then you just install whatever version you need. Many times you're going to encounter an npm node package that will need a particular version, which is unfortunate. React went through a few of those phases, so you might have to deal with that. Okay? Very much like running RBENV or RVM. So that allows you to install a different version of Node. But Node is pretty easy. You install Node. After you install this, you'll have Node on there. You might have to change your bash to actually point to the executable. I'm not sure everything that NVM gives you. But once you do that, you'll have Node installed. You probably already do have Node installed for something. A lot of us have been using Node for a while to actually do our asset compilation. Okay? It's either that or what? What's the Mustang or race car one? The Ruby asset compilation, JavaScript compilation. What was that? Huh? Ruby Racer. That's it. Yeah. So you have those two choices. So you probably already have Node installed. That's great. Now you have the ability to actually do package management because you have NPM. And you have tools where you can actually put a package on your application, which means that you can have great tools like Grunt and Browsify and a lot of tools that will help you along the way. So Node.js, does it use common or require? It uses require, right. There's also common.js, which you can use, and some other things use as well. AMD, yeah, is the other one, yep, which is what common, yep. And what is that? What go ahead. Right. So basically dependency management and requiring, because JavaScript natively doesn't have anything like require. That's an add-on. So now that we have Node installed, we can do things where we can install a package. So Node.js, I believe if you have a Packagejson, then it's great because you can just include all your dependencies in it. But you can also create one for your application by doing, is it a node command or an npm command? Was it? npm init. Yep. npm init in your root folder on your Rails application will build a standard Packagejson, which will allow you to basically include, like your gem file, right? All of the libraries that you want to include. If you want to include Browsify, you do it there, right? And then you can just do npm install in that directory, and it will be the same as when you do bundle, effectively, right? It'll go ahead and pull all of the versions that you need for those libraries and install them to your code base. Because, again, JavaScript is an important language, and we shouldn't be treating it like a second-class citizen by wrapping JavaScript libraries in gems, because that's weird, because that's two package management levels of inception. And who needs that? Let's go ahead and use the tools that they're providing us. Right? Thoughts? Some people do use Bower. Not in a while. Wait, CrowdTap, right? You guys use it? Yep. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. No worries. The author's a great guy. Yeah. But there's ways around that, right? You can include all of that in shrink wrap and do various other steps, correct? Yeah. But the way to go forward is to build with what everyone else is building because those are at least established now. All right. go ahead and create a Packagejson. Also, you've got additional things. Now that you have module loading, you've got something like a gem file. You've got something like bundler. You've got analogous systems that you can work with for your JavaScript that we already work with for our Ruby, right? But we don't have a rake or something like that, right?
Well, NPM, the Packagejson comes with scripts.
That's true. I was trying to just reach for something to bridge me to Grunt or Gulp or Broccoli.
It only allows predefined lists of scripts.
Right. Yeah. So building your own rake files or adding tasks or something like that is a little tough with just NPM. So what people have done is they've built additional task tools. I think the most popular one right now is either Grunt or Gulp.
Well, Gulp is the new wave. Or
Okay, yeah, it's the hip new kid. Yeah, but there's like 15 other ones, right? There's Broccoli and there's a bunch.
Broccoli isn't a task runner, it's only a build tool.
Oh, really? What's brunch? Because there's brunch as well, right? So yeah. So Webpack is the main thing, right? That everybody's moving toward, because that's basically Webpack is part of the ES 2015 ES6 movement, right? What's the difference between ES 2015 and ES6? Anybody know? I think there's a minimal difference in features. I think they came up with 2015 to get us to start using ES6, but not quite. So Webpack is our module builder, right? Which you all should be reading about and using in some respects. Yeah, Webpack uses CommonJS, right? Or no, dependencies can be written in CommonJS. They may let you choose, yep. It's something to look at. That's going to be coming up very quick. And Webpack allows you to do interesting things like conditionally require things, right? Kind of like we do for our environments a lot of times, right? There's a lot of things for test environments that we may not want for our development environment or our production environment. Webpack may be a good solution there. But, yeah, Grunt right now is something good to learn. Learn Grunt because then you can, it's fairly simple. All you do is install a global CLI for it. And then you can write your own Grunt file, which can do some interesting things like what your package management or asset compilation or things that Asset Pipeline does, or be able to conditionally build certain bits, or run JS hint. Or does everybody know what JS hint is? Okay. Does everybody know what a linter is? Has everyone read Douglas Crawford's The Good Parts? Okay, you should read that. Crawford is opinionated and wrote JSLint, but he like many people in the Free Software Foundation, may not be right about everything, but he took a stand and was the first of us to actually publicize that we're doing it wrong, which is great. And we should definitely think of him as the thought leader for JS community, despite what certain online communities might say. Grunt is excellent, and you can do a lot with it, and you should probably use that so you can have something analogous, right? There's a bunch of plugins for it as well. We run a lot of tests through it, through Jest, and I believe there's plugins for Jasmine and a few other things.
So does this mean not using Asset Pipeline for anything?
I'm not going to say that. You can use Asset Pipeline and Grunt together. Asset Pipeline and any of the technologies that we've talked about, you can use with the Asset Pipeline. In fact, there's a Rails ES6 Babel plugin or gem that full-on uses Babel files or ES6 files, which is what we're using when we're doing JSX and things of that nature effectively. And there's a plugin for using that with Rails right now. So if you're interested in using Babel, which is the next, it's basically porting all of the features coming to a browser near you to your browser right now. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah. It's all of the great features for the next version of JavaScript, which you should be knee-deep in at this point. We need to get some JavaScript literacy in Rails quick because Rails is important because it's a more mature back end and it works really well and it's easy to get up and running. But when we pile a bunch of JavaScript and don't treat it with the same respect we do our Ruby code onto our Rails app, we just make Rails look bad and make us look illiterate, which is not great. We should have the same respect we have. So, ES6 Sprocket's ES6. Full-on uses the Asset Pipeline. And you can still do just about everything that we've talked about today with the Asset Pipeline without much work. You can even have Grunt deliberately work with the Asset Pipeline to do pre-compilation and all of that work using the same SHAs, which is great. Yep?
Are there any considerations with the Asset Pipeline working with newfangled JavaScript MC frameworks? A lot of different JavaScript assets. I actually don't know, so I wonder if there are any best practices with handling the Asset Pipeline.
I'm going to say that currently my strategy is to use Asset Pipeline as long as I can stand it, right? Because I don't believe that Rails treats JavaScript with the same respect that Node does. And therefore, there are a lot better ways to handle the same type of pre-compilation, right? And I generally move to a Grunt-driven system eventually, not right away. Because Asset Pipeline will treat you well for a while, and it will be a while before you build up the JavaScript that you would actually require moving. So,
is there a particular feature that you're hanging on to Asset Pipeline for?
No, it's just laziness, really. I mean, Rails gives you something out of the box. May as well use it for as long as you can, right? It's basically the same strategy that I'll use for a lot of JavaScript UX features in my applications, right? Use a generic view that Rails will give you out of the box and then build whatever additional components on top of that the features require in something like React, right? But there's no reason to build an entire React component when your requirement is just to have a paginated list of something, right? Introduce things as you need them is my general philosophy. So that gives you basically your package management and the ability to do things like starting to move to modern frameworks like React. React is moving fast, so is all of JavaScript and its world. And that's another reason why we should still be good Rails developers and do our back end in Rails. So it's really well-defined and something that we can rely on. Node is changing much faster in a lot of ways, and especially with the ES6, it's nice to have just a solid either Go backend or Rails backend that's going to be delivering a solid API.
The things in Rails that you
the things that in Rails that you can't do in Node.js. You have, I'm going to say that the community is better. You're going to have things like authentication frameworks that are long-living, that have a lot of people contributing to, and have life. I'm not sure what Node's authentication framework work is right now, but I think there's like 2 NPMs that are written by people flavor of the week. But it doesn't seem like the Node community really has, maybe aside from Express, examples of packages that the community embraces and blesses and all uses and contributes to. I think generally when someone doesn't like, as a developer Node, if you don't like something, you write your own rather than making requests and contributing, or at least that feels like the community to me. I would love to be proven wrong. I think that's just a matter of maturity in the community. Do you guys feel that way? I mean, there's some things like when companies back something like Angular, right, or React, it definitely has a more monumental sense. But in the Ruby community and Rails community, you have a lot of gems that have been accepted for some time that are the authoritative and well accepted, that has a lot of history, and all of the code is shared, and when competitors come up, they learn from each other. That feels a little bit more established in the community. I would say that there's nothing that Rails can do that Node can't. There's nothing that Node can do that Ruby and Rails can't in some respects. The languages are very different.
With Meteor.js, do you think there's a lot of benefit the way, like it seems like there's this idea that all the code we make, like it's going to be on the server and the client, so improvements to the server is the same.
Meteor.js was interesting for a bit, but I don't think. I think it's. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I haven't been following it that well. I think there is benefit to having similar code bases, but your server should not. Your code for your server should not look like your code for your client in any language. They're different things, and they need to be treated differently. That's why you have stupid things like in Java, you actually pass VM flags to tell it to do garbage collection differently when running as a server. So, any other questions? Can go a little bit more into React and testing with that, or some components. We can talk a little bit more about Angular or modern frameworks, but I want to make sure that we're covering the bases and everyone. Or is there any other topics you want to cover?
Well, I saw an article yesterday where somebody was wondering what's the best way to use factories defined in Rails in their client-side JavaScript tests.
Oh, what?
Well, I mean, just he wanted to.
Was this a Yahoo answer?
Well, I mean, he said that he found he was duplicating a lot of model code.
Sure.
Generated
All right. You're going to duplicate code. There are things that can generate JavaScript from Ruby.
What he did was he made an API that converts the factories from JSON to do.
Sure, I mean, like that's built into our objects too. I mean, you can do a to.json on any object in Rails. I believe any model for sure.
Made an API where the JavaScript could actually connect to factory build, and then he said that had its own problems.
Yeah. It sounds like he's trying to solve a problem that's minimal, right? Rather, because it actually, that's, so it sounds like it's a tidying issue more than anything, because he doesn't want to write both sets of code. I think for testing, people tend to subscribe to dry as a principle when they shouldn't. Okay?
Why do you say that?
Because dry tends to chafe in testing code. Right?
Yeah, sometimes it's good to remove duplication with testing. Sometimes it isn't.
And then what is the difference? What's the determination? I think is what people are wondering.
Whatever, I'll refactor it as much as possible. Whatever, if I have time or whatever. But with the test code, you don't want to refactor it so much that it. This is just a general thing. Like I said, I don't know anything about JavaScript practically, but in the
Sure.
3D world, you don't want to refactor it so much that it's not weird. And that can happen a lot.
Yeah.
You can refactor it so that it's like, oh, it's so dry, but like you cannot understand. But,
I guess the thing is too, like especially in your case. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we, for at least all Ruby tests, we say, and I assume I got tests, we say don't trade clarity for dry.
Right. Exactly.
Your code and your tests is kind of ugly, duplicated, but it's super clear.
Yep.
That's fine.
And that's what you're looking for in testing, is you're looking for mystic code, something that actually is like, you want to know that I'm expecting these parameters to come from an AJAX call or something, right? And if that changes, that probably should break my tests, but you also should know to rework that test on that change, because you're responsible for both sets of code. I'm not sure that that's a problem that needs solving to write one factory to rule them all. Because again, like most of that is coming through an actual endpoint, and just like, for instance, I don't want to have all of my code for a model and a factory be in one central place, right? And I don't want to centralize also my asserts for my assigns from my controller, even though they're all touching the same, field, right? We don't want to have that all in one place, because that removes the intentionality of those different layer tests.
What do you think about CoffeeScript?
I think CoffeeScript is abused. I think it's great. I think that we should all use things that make. Yeah. All right on. Thanks. I think we should all be using writing with tools that make our code better, right? And 9 times out of 10, writing in CoffeeScript will make our code better. What the problem is that people tend to use it. Where did I see? There's a great, actually in the working with JavaScript and Rails from guides, right? There's a couple of great bits where the CoffeeScript, it looks like they're just leveraging the features of CoffeeScript to make your code terse, rather than leveraging the composition structures of it, right? And you shouldn't do that. It's not a tool just to write, 4 less characters. It's something so that you're going to compose a decent object, right? And your function is going to be properly defined. Yeah, but I think you're going to have similar problems. The only problem with, I think ES6 is amazing, and we should be using all of its features. But you're going to have people who will treat prototypical composition more like object-oriented composition, because you have things that look similar, right? That's the only danger with that. But I have no problem with CoffeeScript. When I first encountered CoffeeScript, I was pretty impressed by the actual effort. I had some concerns, but then I just took really big libraries and parsed it into CoffeeScript and then translated it back and forth a couple of times, and it was fine. Right? It sometimes made them better. So I have no problem with CoffeeScript. Anybody else?
Well, so you say you don't like it when you just use it to make code terse.
Yes.
And is that because you're balancing the benefit of terseness against the downside of having extra dependency, or do you just?
I guess it just bothers me because I don't think that's its point. I think that we should be leveraging it and using it as a tool, not to dissuade, but to encourage literacy, right? Do I? I haven't been. Why? It just offends you? Fair, yeah. I mean, again, CoffeeScript, I think, is going to go away in a lot of ways. We should be moving to Babel, right, in the Rails community. That's my assertion. I'd like to see that happen because you're going to have a lot of the same benefits, but the actual world will agree with us. And wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, CoffeeScript has said it's not going to accept the new feature, so eventually it'll.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have to move to the new standards for JavaScript eventually, I think. I don't know. DHH is a funny guy. So, so the only other thing I want to talk about a little bit is a little bit of React and building things out. What have you found for React, those of you who are using it, and Rails? What problems have you had? What challenges did you overcome?
I just got on a project, so.
Okay. Well, even conceptually, like I think it took a little while for me to understand Flux, right? And that's the thing with React as compared to like Angular. Angular is a full framework, right? React is not. React needs Flux in order to be a full framework. Or at least the two components that you need to deliver similar features, right? So when you're learning React, you should learn Flux as well. Otherwise, you're only getting half of the story. Has anyone played with Flux and React but not been on a project yet? Have you been following it?
Well, I'm a bit confused about how to learn about Flux, given that it's not a tool, it's just like a set of documents.
Okay. Well, it's a methodology.
Yeah, or like a standard organization or something. But how do you actually get started with it? There's no like sample.
Well, that's not a bad place to start. So there's a couple of decent publications and applications that use Flux on the web using React, right? So I think what is a good way to start? Like my answer to all of those things generally is to start an application. But I think there's a couple of really good set of documents about the single direction flow, which is, I don't know. So I've always gone to here, right? The actual docs for Flux rather than the build in React, right? Which has a couple of good docs and it talks about the dispatching. Yeah. So the thing about you can use this, right? You can use the default dispatcher, and you can use the things that Facebook has released, but you don't have to. Flux is a reference implement, or they have reference implementations of the Flux patterns, effectively. Why we're not calling it Flux capacitor at this point, I'm not sure. Seems like it's just dying for a gem.
What do you think about, so like one, you're asking like one of the things that I've seen from high level, like I said, I've only been on the project for about a week now, and I barely understand Flux, but I know that we started using Flux.
Sure.
But, and then now so like supposedly like the person who's in charge of that project started that now, and I've heard this on a couple podcasts too, that now it's sort of like Redux is sort of in vogue.
There's a few things, and again, it's moving very, very fast.
Right. And Redux uses the same pattern that Elm uses, I guess.
Oh, really?
I don't really know what that means. Well, the need for that is like it's just moving so fast that we try to use, I guess, Reflux, which is like something added on to Flux, and now we're sort of like regretting that decision.
Yep. We've just been using straight up Flux pattern directly with React. So we've tried to avoid using a lot of third-party components because they seem to just die by the wayside. I mean, we're not even going to be using JSX anymore, right? Because that's effectively taken over. I mean, and we are, but it's Babel is the same syntax, right? So rather than have it, I believe Facebook stopped developing it. And they're just adapting Babel as the language for it. I think Angular and React I think are the two choices I would make for a modern framework. Backbone is fine, but it's not giving you the entire picture. And it definitely only gives you the tools to work with, which I think is better than some. I actually prefer just having the toolkit rather than what Ember does, which is builds the entire world for you. But that's a personal preference, and I think regardless, we all will have a very rich client built on one of these things very soon. Do you want to talk about your React or Redux development? I haven't worked with it.
I don't work with that.
Okay.
I just know that it's sort of like a new.
Right. So it just manages your stores. You're basically just managing all of this, right, through a framework of sorts. But the beauty of Flux and also React is that you have discrete components, modules, and you can easily test them. So you can have something that works really well. I think what I'm going to do is probably put an article up for today's session, talking about some of the refactoring decisions that you can make and the tools that you should be acquainting yourself with up, and then follow it up with a full React component article in Rails. Because we're a little bit stretched on time, I think, at this point. It's getting there, yeah. We wouldn't be able to get into like full discussion on React. That's an entire session, I think. Yeah.
I will say that like someone who came out of boot camp a year ago, now I'm super strong in JavaScript, and just started learning React about a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
Super simple DSL.
Yep. It's not as much to bite off of as Angular. I'd say, did you do Bootstrap? Or Backbone?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I'm not sure how it would compare.
yeah, I mean, what I like about learning React right now is it's very simple to just start building something.
Yep.
The
The one thing I will say is that documentation and articles on React are wildly all over the place on the web right now.
That's a problem.
It's a huge problem, yep.
So what we did is the two of us that are new on the team that just went to build React. I went through the first sort of 5 modules, and then and I also used one other blog that I found how to create components. Just went into it and just started building components.
Cool. You want to link to the what tools you used onto the meetup?
What's that?
You want to link to those articles on the meetup?
But you can get up and running super fast.
You can, but again, like I think a lot of problem for newbies is there are a lot of wildly contradictory and very looking for documentation and tutorials is kind of hit and miss. So when we do find good documents, we should be sharing them. Cool. Cool.
Yeah, I actually have a really good, I don't know if I'm referring to the same one, but that's how I learned React using a Rails backend. I'm probably going to share that after.
There is a integration gem, right? Yeah, I have not used that. Yeah, I've heard good things about it. It just basically does all the things that we talked about as far as integrating with Asset Pipeline.
Yeah, there's a really nice concrete talk from RailsConf, 2015, about React and Rails. If you Google React Rails Confreaks.
Yep. Yeah, everybody should be looking at Confreaks. Cool. All right. All right, cool. So let's, if there's no other questions, I'll close, and then we can have a little a soiree and then head out. Yep. Cool. Oh, was there something over here? Anyone? No? Cool. All right. Thanks so much. Thank you.